was involved in a car crash. They buried him 5 years ago. They mourned him, cried over him, and moved on. But on the day his wife was set to marry his best friend, he returned. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a man who never truly died. And with him, the secrets buried deep in the ashes began to rise. This is a story of trust, betrayal, and a love that refused to stay buried. The church glowed with sacred elegance. White roses lined every aisle, golden candles flickered near the altar, and soft organ music rose like a whisper of heaven. Jane stood before the priest, with Godwin, her groom, veil over her face, trembling gently. Today was her wedding day, again. Her fingers clutched the bouquet tighter as the priest's voice echoed. If there is anyone here who has a reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The whole church fell silence. Jane blinked back a tear. Her heart ached with a mix of grief and hope. The congregation turned round to see if anyone was standing up, but nobody was. Then, just as the priest was about to continue with the ceremony, the great wooden doors at the church entrance slammed open with a loud bang. Every head turned sharply. A tall, dark figure stood in the doorway. Clothed in black from head to toe, his face was lean, serious, familiar. The church fell into weird silence. The organ music stopped. Some people squinted. Others gasped. Jane? Is that not? It can't be. Jesus, have mercy, a woman shouted. The figure took slow, deliberate steps forward, his leather shoes echoing against the polished marble floor. He stopped midway down the aisle, locked eyes with the bride, and then spoke. His voice low, commanding and chilling. Cancel this wedding now, or live in regrets for the rest of your life. Gasps filled the church like a thunderstorm. Jane froze. No, 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 she whispered, her lips trembling. It can't be. Is that Chuka? Someone cried out. I thought he died, another shouted, standing up to get a better view. I saw the accident scene with my own eyes, an elderly woman screamed. She grabbed her handbag and ran out of the church, high heels clacking wildly. Few more guests followed her, nearly tripping over themselves. The groom's mother clutched her chest and collapsed into her seat. The choir began murmuring prayers under their breath. But Chuka said nothing else. He just stood there, eyes sharp, expression unreadable. The groom, Godwin, stepped protectively in front of Jane. Who are you? What kind of sick joke is this? Security! There was no response. Chuka didn't flinch. He just stared, not blinking, not moving, like a man who had seen the grave and returned with unfinished business. Jane's breathing grew rapid. The bouquet slipped from her hands. Her legs gave way beneath her. Thud. She collapsed to the floor and passed out. Screams erupted. Jesus! Call an ambulance! She's fainted! More people began to take to their heels, and the church became almost empty. Chuka remained still, watching everything, eyes never leaving Jane's unconscious form. Not a flicker of emotion, just presence. The church hall continued to buzz with chaos. Jane lay still on the ground as a few women fanned her with hymn books. Her maid of honor knelt beside her, near tears, trying to revive her. Outside the church, a small crowd had gathered, whispering and peeking through the doors. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with fear and uncertainty. But Suka Nwasu stood motionless, eyes locked on the bride. He hadn't moved an inch since he made his single, haunting statement. Cancel this wedding now, or live in regrets for the rest of your life. The priest leaned against the altar, visibly shaken. This is spiritual," he murmured. "What kind of apparition?" Godwin, with his fists clenched, marched straight toward the silent man. "I don't know who you are or what game you're playing, but this ends now." He stopped, just inches from Chuka, searching his face. The resemblance was too perfect. The sharp jawline, the scar near his left eyebrow, the way he stood, confident, composed. No, this wasn't an impersonation. This was Chuka, his bride's late husband. Godwin stepped back, stunned. "But you died. I mean, we all saw the crash and the burnt vehicle, and we all buried you." Still, Chuka said nothing. He turned his head slowly, scanning the entire hall. A little boy began to cry. Even the priest took a step behind the altar, gripping his rosary like a lifeline. The sound of sirens echoed faintly from outside. Someone had called emergency services. Jane stirred. Her fingers twitched. Then, with a weak groan, she sat up slowly, helped by her maid of honor and 2 other women. Her eyes met Chuka's again. She blinked twice. Tears welled up instantly. "No, we buried you, Chuka," she said shakily, her voice hoarse. "I cried over you. I stopped living after you died. You were gone. You were gone." Still, he said nothing, no explanation, just that same haunting stare. Jane rose unsteadily to her feet, brushing off the hands helping her. "You can't just walk in here and tear my life apart again," she said, trembling. "What are you? A ghost? A memory? What do you want from me?" Chuka finally moved, just 1 step forward. Church members gasped and backed away, like he was some kind of spirit. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small. He placed it gently on the first pew, then turned and walked out of the church. No words, no explanation, just silence and footsteps. Jane stared at the object he left behind. Her heart skipped. It was a pendant. Her pendant. The one she gave Chuka on their 3rd wedding anniversary. It had image of their faces on it. She had it custom made. The pendant was slightly burnt on the edges, confirming that it was at the fire scene where Chuka's body was found. Jane felt her knees weaken again. She couldn't speak. She couldn't even cry. The church was still in chaos long after Chuka walked out. The guests whispered in huddles, glancing at the doors as if expecting him to return. Jane sat motionless, staring at the pendant. She got up and picked it. The priest tried to restore calm, but his voice was shaky. "My children, today's ceremony will not continue. There is a need for clarity." He gently closed his Bible, then walked away from the altar. Jane sat in silence, staring at nothing, the pendant now clenched tightly in her palm. Her breathing was shallow. Godwin sat beside her, stiff and unnerved. His jaw twitched, but he tried to sound calm. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Jane didn't answer. He looked at her again. It was probably someone playing a sick game, a look-alike. You know people can go to any length these days for attention. Jane slowly turned her face toward him, her voice almost a whisper. "It was him, Godwin. I would know Chuka anywhere. That man was my husband." That night, the story hit social media. Bride's presumed dead husband crashes her wedding after 5 years. Photos of Chuka's dramatic entrance spread like wildfire. Some said he was a ghost. Some claimed he faked his death. Some swore it was a desperate ex seeking attention. But the only one who had seen him up close knew better. It was Chuka. Jane returned to her house after the wedding incident. The following morning, she sat on her bed in silence. Godwin had called twice. She didn't answer. Instead, she stared at the small pendant Chuka had left behind, tears streaming down her cheek. Her fingers trembled as she opened the clasp. Inside was a tiny piece of paper, folded tightly. She unfolded it. A single line was written in Chuka's handwriting. "Not everyone who died stayed dead." Her heart dropped. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Where are you, Chuka?" That evening, Jane met with her longtime friend and lawyer, Ugochi. She laid out everything she'd seen and felt. "I need help," Jane said firmly. "I want to find him. I have to know. What happened to him, where he's been, and why he warned me." Ugochi stared at her in disbelief. "Jane, are you talking about the same Chuka whose burial we both attended? The one you buried yourself?" Ugochi asked, looking confused. "That man was Chuka. It sounds crazy, but it was him," Jane replied calmly. She took out the note from the pendant. Ugochi read it, then slowly nodded. "I know someone who does quiet investigations, discreet, off-record. Let me make a call." She called a private investigator. Jane spoke with him, gave him the details, and he began investigation. 3 days later, Jane was in her room, curled up on the edge of her bed, when her phone buzzed. It was a call from her father. She hesitated before picking up. "Addy." "Jane?" Chief Ahmadi's deep voice came through, firm but not kind. "I need you to come to the house this evening. Come along with Godwin." She sat up slightly. "Why?" "We need to talk. You, him, and his parents," he replied sharply. Jane's heart sank. "Daddy?" "No excuses, Jane. It's important." He ended the call. Later that evening, Jane and Godwin arrived at her father's mansion. Godwin's parents were already seated in the parlour. Chief Ahmadi stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Jane's mother sat quietly beside Godwin's mother, both whispering with knitted brows. The atmosphere was stiff. "Let's not waste time," Chief Ahmadi began, walking forward. "This wedding, this entire situation, has brought shame and confusion to our families. I want to know what's really going on." Godwin cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "Sir, I believe the man that appeared at the church is not Chuka, and..." Just then, there was a knock at the door. Everyone turned. The housekeeper peeked in, a strange expression on his face. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." "Tell them to come back," Chief replied, but it was too late. The doors opened, and Chuka walked in. Gasps filled the room, and everyone was terrified. Chuka wore a dark shirt, clean jeans, and a calm expression. Right behind him walked an older, rough-skinned man in worn traditional clothing, holding a walking stick. There was silence. You could hear the ceiling fan humming above them. Chuka stopped in the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over everyone. Then he spoke, clearly, confidently. "Please." "Don't be afraid," he said. "I'm not a ghost. I am Chuka Nwosu, the man you all thought you buried." Everyone was shocked. "I know this is confusing," Chuka continued, "but I am alive, and I thank God for that." He turned slightly and gestured to the man behind him. "This man, this hunter, is the reason I'm standing here today. He saved me from that crash 5 years ago." Jane's eyes began to water. Her lip quivered as she sat down slowly. Godwin shifted in his seat again. His fingers were fidgeting with his watch strap. He couldn't seem to stay still. The hunter stepped forward slowly, his eyes calm, his voice low but firm. "Good evening to you all," he began. "I know many of you are wondering what truly happened, and I will tell you." He looked around the room, resting his gaze briefly on Jane, then on Chief Ahmadi. "But before I speak, let me first say this. Everything you thought you knew about that crash was not what it seemed. The day it happened, I was there. I was returning from the forest where I went hunting. I was in a very happy mood that day. It was late, maybe close to 6 p.m. The bush path was quiet and the weather was very calm. I was just about to turn into the narrow footpath that leads to my village when I heard a loud screech, tires screaming against the road, then a crash, the sound of metal twisting and breaking like firewood. My heart jumped. I dropped everything and ran toward the expressway. By the time I reached the roadside, I saw that a black SUV had veered off the road and crashed deep into the slope. The bonnet was already smoking. One tire was spinning in the air. I didn't wait to think. I slid down the side of the slope, grabbed hold of a branch, and made my way toward the wreck. There was smell of fuel in the air. Time was ticking, and I knew I needed to move fast. I pulled on the back door, but it was jammed. I climbed over the trunk and yanked the driver's side open. That was when I saw him. He was badly injured, but he was still breathing, barely. I didn't know who he was, but I knew I had to move quickly. I used my wrapper to hold his head steady, dragged him out from under the wheel, and pulled him through the broken door. I dragged him inch by inch up the slope. I laid him under a tree by the road and ran back down towards the car. I remembered there was someone else, someone in the passenger seat. I could see the figure slumped to the side, motionless. But just before I reached the car, boom! It exploded. Flames shot up like the breath of a dragon. I fell backwards. My ears rang for minutes. The fire lit up the whole roadside. I was unable to save the second man, and that really broke me. When I finally gathered myself, I looked back at the man I had pulled out. He was unconscious. I carried him to my village. We live far, no hospital, no phones. I have a small hut by the stream. My wife boiled herbs, and I wrapped his ribs every day with palm fronds and soaked cloth. He didn't wake up for almost a week. When he finally woke up, the only thing he could remember was his name, nothing more. I asked him about his family, but he simply just stared at me. That was when I knew. This man had lost everything. He lost his memory. After I realized he didn't remember anything, I started calling him my son, just so he'd feel like someone still saw him as a son. He couldn't speak much at first. But every morning when the cock crowed, he would sit up and look out of the window like he was waiting for something that never came. I boiled herbs for him daily, used shea butter on his wounds, fed him bitter yam porridge when he was too weak to chew. Weeks passed. He healed, slowly but surely, and when he could finally stand on his feet, he begged me to go out with him as he was becoming bored, staying at home. So I took him hunting. We walked into the bush every morning. I taught him how to set traps, how to tell which footprints belonged to bush rabbits and which ones were goats gone missing from the village. He listened closely, worked hard, always eager to learn. He never complained, not once. Soon, we laughed together, ate roasted antelope by the fire, sat by the stream and told stories under the moon. He never asked who he was again. This continued for over 4 years, and I was so glad to finally have a son, as my only son and child mysteriously disappeared many years back. One day, something happened. We were coming back from hunting, had a good catch of grass cutters that morning. I decided to take the long path, the one that curves around the hill and comes out by the expressway, where his car crash happened. I didn't think it would mean anything, but the moment we got near that road where the crash had happened, he stopped. Suddenly, like a spirit brushed past him, he stood frozen, eyes locked on a spot by the roadside just beyond the slope. He didn't move. I called him, but he didn't answer. Then, slowly, he walked down the side of the road, to the exact spot where I had found him that night. It had all been cleared. No burnt car, no police tape, just dust and dry grass. But something was calling him. He knelt and brushed the earth with his palm. And that's when he saw it, a small silver object, half buried in the soil. He picked it up. It was a pendant, burnt around the edges, but still looking good. He opened it and stared at it, long, deep, like his soul recognized it before his mind did. And then his hand started shaking. His breathing changed, and he whispered like a prayer. "This is mine. This is me and my." Then he went quiet. That was the first crack, the first memory. When we got back to the hut that day, he didn't speak for hours. He sat outside, staring at that pendant like it held the key to another life. I didn't disturb him. I just watched. And as the days passed, something in him began to shift. He started waking up in the middle of the night, breathing hard, sweating, whispering names. Sometimes he'd stand outside at dawn, looking toward the horizon like he was waiting for someone to come walking out of the trees. Then, one evening, as we were roasting yams near the fire, he looked at me and said, "I remember everything." My chest tightened. That evening, he told me everything, how he was traveling to the Asaba. He had driven for about 1 hour when he saw a man standing by the roadside, stranded, waving frantically. Chuka had stopped and offered him a lift. He said the guy seemed harmless, grateful. He also said the man saw his wristwatch and admired it, so he gave it to him as a gift. The man wore it immediately and was grateful. They talked in the car for a while before the brake suddenly failed completely. He remembered pressing the pedal over and over again, but the car didn't slow down till the crash. That night, he cried for the first time since I found him. He cried like a man who had lost more than his memory. He had lost time. I held his shoulder. I told him he was still lucky because the land of the dead had spat him back out. The next morning, I gave him every penny I had. It was enough for him to find his way to the city. He didn't want to take it. But I told him, "Go, your life is calling. Don't miss it twice." He hugged me, tight, like a son to a father. Then he left. And I never saw him again. Until 3 days ago, when he came to the village and asked me to come here with him, the hunter concluded. By the time the man finished his narration, Jane was crying profusely, while others looked very shocked. Chuka bowed to the man in appreciation and then turned to face them. He cleared his throat and began to talk. When I returned to the city, it felt like I had landed in another lifetime. The buildings looked taller, the streets busier, the faces unfamiliar. So much had changed. It had been almost 5 years, but to me it felt like I had only closed my eyes for a day. I didn't go straight to my house. I didn't even know if it was still mine. Instead, I walked the streets for a while. I wanted to feel the city in my bones again. After walking for a while, I was hungry, so I stepped into a small restaurant. It was quiet, just a few customers. I sat at the back, near the window, and ordered a simple plate of jollof rice and began to eat. That was when I heard them. 2 men sitting 2 tables away, talking and laughing. I wasn't listening at first, until I heard a name that made my blood freeze. Jane. I looked up. They were holding something between them, a card. I squinted and saw her face, smiling on a glossy sheet of paper. Then I saw the name printed next to hers. Godwin. They were talking about her wedding to him. I wiped my hands, stood up slowly and walked toward them. I was careful, calm. "Excuse me," I said. "Please, can I take a look at that invitation?" The younger man looked up. "Why, you know them?" I smiled. "I used to." They handed it to me. And there it was. Jane. My Jane. My wife, getting married. To Godwin, my closest friend, the man I trusted with my home, my secrets, my life. I felt dizzy, but I thanked them politely and returned the card. I lost appetite immediately. As I walked out of the restaurant, everything began to flood back. I remembered the day before my trip. Godwin was in my house. Jane was on a business trip, but she was aware that I was travelling. I told Godwin that I needed to service my car and he offered to help. He took the car out for servicing, and when he returned, I saw him bent over the bonnet doing something. At the time, I thought he was helping. I even thanked him. But then 5 years later, he was set to marry my wife. I began to connect the dots. I realized that my brake was tampered with. The brake failure was too sudden. Godwin and his so-called mechanic were the only ones who touched my car before I travelled. I have been around for over a month now. I didn't call anyone. I didn't show myself. I have been doing some menial jobs here and there to raise money to sustain myself. I didn't know if I was ready to face Jane. I didn't know if I had the strength to look Godwin in the eye, but I decided that the wedding would not hold, not until the truth is revealed. Chuka concluded, sounding very emotional. Still crying, Jane stood up, walked over to Godwin and gave him a slap. "Start talking now," she yelled at him. "You told me you were out of town when Chuka was travelling. Now he is saying you were with him the day before he travelled. What do you know about the failed break?" Godwin stared at Jane. "Well, it was all Chuka's fault," he began slowly. "Chuka betrayed me many years ago. We grew up together in the same neighbourhood, attended the same primary and secondary school. We were best of friends. As fate would have it, we both gained admission into the University of Abuja. I studied computer engineering while he studied computer science. Our friendship continued. In fact, I stopped seeing him as my friend. I saw him as a brother. We did almost everything together, and everything was moving on smoothly until Jane came into the picture. We first saw her on a Friday morning. Chuka and I were walking toward the ICT department when I caught a glimpse of her from across the road. She was standing near the faculty block, speaking with a lecturer, her hand resting lightly on a stack of books. She was elegance and intelligence rolled into one. She looked like a poem. I remember nudging Chuka and saying, "Look at that girl, she's beautiful." He glanced at her briefly and nodded with a distracted smile, then went back to whatever code he was typing in his head. But I couldn't take my eyes off her. Something about her held me there. We saw her again the following week, this time in the library. She sat 2 tables ahead of us, surrounded by books, headphones in her ears, scribbling notes with intense focus. I found myself pretending to read, but really I was studying her every movement. I was captivated. The 3rd time we saw her, again in the library, I felt something shift inside me. I couldn't control my feelings anymore. I knew it was no longer admiration. I was falling in love with her. That night, as we walked back to the hostel, I turned to Chuka. My heart was beating faster than usual. I told him I was falling in love with the girl we saw at the library. He listened, like a good friend should. Then I asked him to help me speak to her. I remember my exact words. I want to speak to her, I really do. But I don't know how. You know me, I stumble over words, I overthink. But you're good with people. You're bold, you know how to connect. Please, help me talk to her. Just say something. Introduce me, I think she's special. He looked at me again, then promised he would speak to her on my behalf. A few days later, he told me he had spoken to her. He told me her name was Jane, that she was in her 2nd year, brilliant, focused, and soft-spoken. She's seen you around too, he added. I kept asking, did she say anything else? Did she seem interested? But he didn't give me an answer. Weeks passed. I started noticing that they were talking more often. Sometimes I'd find them sitting together on campus lawns, sharing snacks, discussing lectures. I was not happy about it, so I confronted him. I asked him if he was seeing her, or if something romantic was going on between them. That was when he confirmed to me that they were dating. I felt the floor vanish beneath me. I asked, "What about me? You knew how I felt. I told you. You promised to talk to her for me." He looked at me and said, "I did talk to her, Godwin. I told her everything you told me, but she said she wasn't interested. She said it was me she liked." His voice was calm, like that explanation would somehow soothe the knife he had just plunged into me. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply said, "It's fine." But it wasn't. I smiled. But deep inside, a part of me died that day. It wasn't just about Jane. It was about loyalty, friendship, trust. He had promised to help me. Instead, he took what I cherished most and wore it like a trophy. That day, I stopped seeing him as a brother, but we remained friends. Yes, I was hurt, deeply, but after the initial sting, I told myself that the relationship won't last. Chuka never holds on to women. And it was true. All through university, his relationships fizzled out within weeks. He wasn't able to keep a woman for long. So I told myself, Jane will be no different. I waited, watched. But it didn't end. Instead, they grew closer. She started showing up at our department hangouts. He would walk her back to her hostel like a devoted husband already. We eventually graduated and life scattered us temporarily. I was posted to River State for NYSC. Chuka was sent to Kwara. I thought the space would reset things, help me move on. It didn't. I went into a relationship during my service year, tried to move on, but it didn't last. We argued constantly. I wasn't invested. I couldn't be. My heart still hovered somewhere between bitterness and longing. After Naiski, we both returned to Abuja. We picked up the pieces of our post-university lives, both landing jobs in tech companies, different firms but within the same area. Sometimes we hung out at weekends. He didn't talk about Jane anymore, and I thought their relationship had ended. Then, 4 years after graduation, we were at a tech networking event when Chuka pulled me aside, grinning from ear to ear. "I have big news. I'm getting married," he said, giggling. I congratulated him and asked who the lucky woman was. He told me it was Jane, the same Jane from our university days. He continued talking, gushing about the proposal, how she cried, how her parents were so proud. I heard every word, but it all sounded distant, like I was underwater. I smiled, I nodded, I hugged him, and when I got home that night, I punched a hole in my wall. Not only had he taken the girl I wanted, he had kept her. He had turned my fantasy into his reality. And me? I was still alone. Still patching relationships that never stuck. Still waking up beside emptiness. His wedding came and I was his best man. I smiled like everyone else. But in my heart I was boiling. From that day on, I started waiting for a moment, an opportunity to get back at him. The opportunity came after 3 years. Jane had travelled and Chuka was home alone, preparing for his upcoming business trip to Asaba. We had lunch together that week, just like old times. That's when he mentioned the car. He said he wanted to get a routine service done on it before the trip. Oil change, alignment, general checkup. I offered to help him take the car to my mechanic so he could tidy up things for his trip, and he was grateful for it. I took the car the next morning, and somewhere between home and the mechanic's shop, I made a decision to interrupt his world. And unfortunately, I knew just how to do it. My father was a mechanic. I grew up around tools, parts, and the smell of grease and petrol. I understood the basics, and more importantly, I knew how to make something fail without leaving obvious damage. So, after the service, I drove the car home as planned. Chuka was in the living room with his laptop when I returned. I quickly opened the bonnet and stared at the brake fluid reservoir. I unscrewed the cap, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and then took a clean syringe I had brought in my pocket. Slowly, steadily, I drained most of the brake fluid from the reservoir. Not all of it, just enough to make the system dangerously weak and make the brake fail. When I finished, I replaced the cap, wiped everything down, and gently closed the bonnet. It looked untouched, like nothing had ever happened. Chuka came back out a few minutes later, glanced at the car and smiled. He thanked me for my help. The next morning, he left for Asababa. Then I got the news that he had a fatal accident and the car went up in flame. Jane collapsed when she heard, and I stood by her side, pretending to be the friend who shared her pain, pretending I had lost something too. I stood by her side during the funeral. I helped make phone calls. I held her when she shook uncontrollably in her father's sitting room. I drove her to the mortuary, to the service, to the church. Everywhere she went, I was there. Loyal, dependable, present. To be candid, I didn't mean for him to die, but somehow I was happy. In the months that followed after the burial, I became Jane's shadow. I was careful, never too close, never too obvious, but always near. I helped fix things around her apartment, drove her to the hospital when she collapsed from exhaustion, checked in on her parents. I tried to win my way into her heart, taking advantage of her vulnerability. But it wasn't easy. Jane was still in love with her late husband, but I was patient with her. When she finally began to get over him, I was the only man around, and it was easy to win my way into her heart. Our families didn't support our relationship and were against our marriage proposal, but we stood our ground and they finally gave their consent. I am sorry about everything. I did it because I felt betrayed, and I have always loved you. Jane, right from the first time I saw you. Please forgive me, Chuka ended. Silence followed his confession. A long, suffocating silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The air was heavy, like it had been punched out of the room. Then suddenly, Godwin's mother rose slowly from her seat, her hand trembling against her chest, her face pale with disbelief. Her voice cracked as she cried, "Godwin, why?" She moved toward him, shaking her head, the tears pouring freely now. "Why would you do this?" she wept. "Is Jane the only woman in the world? With all you had, your job, your mind, your future, you could have had anyone, Godwin. Why did it have to be her?" Godwin's face was blank now. His mother collapsed to her knees, her hands reaching for him. "You were raised better than this," she whispered. "We didn't raise a murderer." Chuka didn't speak. He just stared ahead, as if he could no longer see the room around him. His father stood in the corner, arms folded. He had no words for his son. No defense, no comfort, only shame. Jane stood slowly. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she made no effort to wipe them. She looked at Godwin like she was seeing a stranger. Then she spoke, her voice soft, almost childlike. "It's true," she said. "Everything he said. It's true." She turned to Chuka briefly, then back to the room. "Back then, in school, Chuka came to me. He told me his friend liked me. He was kind about it, respectful, but I told him I didn't feel that way. I told him it was him I liked." Her voice broke now, and the tears came harder. "And I've lived with that choice. I lived with the loss. I mourned Chuka for years. I buried him in my soul. But I made a mistake, a terrible one. I let Godwin in, when I was broken, when I wasn't thinking clearly, when I just wanted to breathe again. I let him take your place, Chuka, and I'll never forgive myself for that." She turned toward Godwin, her hands balled into fists by her side. "You didn't just betray Chuka. You used me. You crawled into my grief and you made a home out of it. I will never forgive you for that." She continued to cry. Chuka finally spoke. "I think we've all heard enough." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He made a single call and said simply, "You can come in now." Within seconds, the front door opened. 2 plain-clothed policemen stepped inside. "That's the man. Arrest him," Chuka said, and turned away. He had recorded Godwin's confession all along. The policeman walked towards Godwin. He didn't resist. His mother screamed, reaching for him. "No, please, please, he's my only son. Please don't take him." She held his arm as the officers began to handcuff him. "Please, forgive him. He's sorry. He didn't mean... He's my son." But the officers were firm. Godwin's father still didn't move. He simply stood in the corner, hands clasped behind him, staring at his son. The handcuffs clicked shut. As the police led Godwin away in cuffs, Jane turned slowly to Chuka. Her steps were hesitant. Her face was wet with tears. She walked as if she were moving in a dream. "So, you're alive, my love," she whispered. Her voice cracked as she reached out a trembling hand, her fingers moving slowly toward his face, almost afraid he would vanish again. But before she could touch him, she collapsed. Her body went limp mid-step, her knees buckling beneath her. Chuka surged forward and caught her just in time, pulling her into his arms before she hit the ground. "Jane," he cried out, panic rushing through him. "Jane, stay with me, please." She was unconscious, pale, breath shallow. Someone brought water. Another shouted for a car. Within minutes, she was rushed to the hospital. At the hospital, she was resuscitated. A doctor stepped into the waiting area where Chuka and Jane's parents were waiting. "She's awake now," he said, "and she's fine, but there's something else." The doctor stepped forward. "She's pregnant." The words struck Chuka like a sledgehammer. Pregnant? For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His mind reeled backward through time to their marriage, to their dreams. They had agreed not to have children in the first 2 years so they could focus on their careers and build their home. They had just started trying when the accident happened, and now she was carrying another man's child, not just any man, but Godwin. Jane was discharged and returned to her father's house, still weak, but quiet. A few days later, Chuka came to see her. The room was quiet, dimly lit by early evening light. Her parents stepped out to give them privacy. Chuka sat across from her. She couldn't meet his eyes. "Congratulations," he said, his voice low but steady. Tears pooled in hers. "Chuka, He raised a hand gently. "Don't. I know." There was a pause. "I just came to say goodbye," he said. Jane's breath caught. "What?" "You're carrying his child, Jane. That changes everything." She looked at him now, eyes wide and full of pain. "But it was a mistake. I never loved him. I was weak, broken. I thought you were dead." "I know," Chuka said softly. "And I don't blame you." His voice trembled, but he continued. "I'm grateful the truth came out. I'm grateful I had the chance to see you again, to breathe this air again. But I can't stay, not like this. You've moved on in the only way you knew how, and now there's a life growing inside you, and I respect that." Jane burst into tears. "I didn't want this. I didn't ask for any of this. But I can't bring myself to terminate it, Chuka. I've always wanted to be a mother." "I know," he said, standing slowly, "and you'll be a good one. That child will be very lucky to have you as mother." He turned toward the door, then stopped. "Tell your parents thank you, and goodbye." "Chuka, please," she whispered. He looked at her one last time. "This is goodbye, Jane." And then he walked out. 3 days later, Chuka did something no one expected. He withdrew the case against Godwin. His family was shocked. Even the police were confused. But Chuka gave no explanation. The truth was, there was no longer a case. The identity of the man who died in the accident was never confirmed. No missing person was linked to him, no family came forward, no charges could hold without a victim's identity, and no ongoing threat. And honestly, Chuka just wanted peace. Godwin was released quietly. He didn't return to Jane, at least not immediately. The silence from Chuka's end was thunderous. Not a call, not a message. Then one morning, Chuka walked into his bank for the first time in 5 years. He reactivated his account. The young banker who assisted him kept stealing glances at him. As if she'd seen a ghost. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, that was me." He had enough money saved, enough for a fresh start. He began searching online, applied for a postgraduate program, and weeks later, he got admitted into a master's program at the University of Manchester, UK. He left Nigeria, left the memories, the betrayal, the pain. He needed a new beginning, far from where his heart had broken. And as the plane lifted into the clouds, Chuka closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "I survived. And now, I will start again." Chuka finished his program 2 years later and soon got an offer from a growing tech company in London. It was a quiet job, nothing flashy, but it gave him structure, purpose, and most importantly, distance. He made new friends, went to dinner sometimes, learned how to laugh again. There were nights when memories snuck in, Jane's smile, their long evening walks, the life they almost built. Sometimes, he'd pause and wonder how different things might have been if he hadn't given Godwin the keys that day. But he never lingered on those thoughts too long, and he never forgot the man God used to rescue him, the hunter. He kept in touch, sending money to him from time to time. In Nigeria, Jane gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. She named her Chuka, as I have asked of God. The moment she held her daughter for the first time, a flood of emotions overwhelmed her. Grief, joy, guilt, love, all colliding at once. She cried through the night, and in the morning she forgave herself. She didn't marry Godwin. He tried. Oh, he tried. Flowers, long letters, apologies layered in tears. But Jane didn't need a husband. She needed healing. She agreed to co-parent for the sake of their daughter, and Godwin, visibly humbled by the weight of his past, respected the boundaries she drew. He became a responsible father, but their story as a couple ended with the child they shared. Jane poured herself into her career. She rose in her field, spoke at conferences, mentored young women, and slowly rebuilt herself from the pieces. People admired her strength, not knowing the storm she had weathered. And every now and then, when her daughter slept quietly beside her, she would look at the little girl's face and whisper, "One day, when you're old enough, I'll tell you the full story of how you came to be." Years passed. Chuka never reached out to Jane again. Not because he hated her, but because he loved her enough to let her live without the shadows of the past. Jane never contacted Chuka either. And so their stories continued, on separate paths, each marked by scars but also by strength. They had both lost something precious, but they had found something even greater: the courage to move forward. Life is full of difficult choices. Chuka dated Jane, the woman his best friend Godwin had fallen for, even though Jane said she preferred Chuka. The truth is, a line was crossed the moment feelings became actions. Was Chuka wrong for following his heart? Was Godwin wrong for seeking revenge? Sometimes, what hurts isn't the action. It's the person behind the action. So here's the truth. Not every yes from life is yours to take, and not every opportunity is worth the damage it could cause to someone you call friend. Before you pursue someone your friend loves, ask yourself, will your happiness still be happiness if it leaves another heartbroken? Chuka paid a price. Godwin paid a greater one. And Jane carried the heaviest weight of all. Let's learn from this. Choose wisely, love carefully, and above all, never let temporary desire destroy what took years to build. What do you think? Was Chuka right to date Jane, or should he have walked away out of respect for his friend? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like if the story touched you. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping and emotional stories like this. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay kind.